a crime scene cleaner. I had an immediate job to do. I received the phone call at exactly 11:30 a.m. Bradley, the police, contacted us for a decomp case. A man was murdered in his apartment and was finally found after 3 weeks. Address is at 1344 Ashbury Street. I grabbed my keys and coffee and jumped in my van. I mentally prepared on the way there, sipping my coffee. The list of what I would use on this case was going around in my head. I was going to use the Bond concentrate fogger. As I pulled up in the driveway, my partner John was standing in the doorway. He had made it there about 10 minutes ago. We suited up and went in. As we entered the house, the smell wafted in. It hit me right in the face. John gagged, "Ugh, this is going to be a messy one." If you ever want to know what a true decomposition case smells like, I'll tell you this. A dead human body releases around 30 different chemical compounds that smell like this. Feces, rotten eggs, musty mothballs, rotting cabbage, rotting flesh, foul garlic. Sorry to make you gag, but it's the truth. It stinks up the whole house, and it takes a while to get the smell up. It will damage personal belongings and the building if not cleaned up. We also do AP testing to make sure the bacteria is all gone. We set up our perimeters. As we approached the bedroom where the strongest odor was coming from, I saw the bloody, coagulated mattress. The man who died was around 45 and murdered with a shotgun. We stripped the bed, and of course the blood had seeped through along with body fluids. It was a yucky mess. I had to be careful not to cross-contaminate the scene. A little blood was on the carpet. We stripped it up as well and hauled everything out carefully and what we could fit into the biohazard bags. John began looking for an overspray of blood. "Yep, right there above the bed on the wall." "Yes, indeed," he pointed at the little splotches. We began to scrub vigorously with our absorbents and disinfect spray, then checked around the bed for teeth, flesh, or body parts. You just never know when you will find an eye or skull fragment. Gunshots will do that. They can be messy. Once we even found a nose. We continued to scrub down and the furniture and anything else that needed it. It was a long, grueling task that took hours, but we managed. I was very satisfied with the job we had done. We finally left. I went home and went to bed and received a call the next day. My boss complaining that there was still blood above the bed. I told him we had scrubbed it all up, we never would have missed a spot. I decided to go back by myself and check it out. I always do a thorough job. I put on my PPE, personal protective equipment, and jumped in the van. Sure enough, a giant spot of blood was there. It looked to be in the shape of a J. How the hell did that happen? I was confused. I knew we wiped that damn wall down very good. I wiped it back up and called my boss. "All done," I told him. He thanked me and told me to always double-check before leaving a scene. I went home. That night around 3 p.m. my cell phone was ringing. It read no number available, but I picked it up anyway just in case of emergency. "Hello?" I said with a groggy voice. No answer. I heard static on the other side. "Hello?" I could make out a gravelly, hoarse voice saying Jimmy. "Sorry, wrong number. This is Bradley," I said annoyingly. I hated being woken up in my sleep. The next day at work, we were eating lunch. I asked him if he knew much about the unsolved murder case we had just cleaned. He told me what he had just found out. Someone finally came forth and confessed. The man, whose name was Sam, lived in the apartment alone. He had just won a settlement from a really bad car accident years ago and was getting a good heap of money. Sam did not have a wife or kids, just an elderly mother who lived the next state over in a nursing home. He had one brother who seemed to be very jealous of Sam's settlement money. The brother had said Sam owed him money because he took care of their mother with Alzheimer's disease before she went into the nursing home, and that Sam should rightfully pay him back for the medical expenses because he was near broke. Sam knew this was not true because his mother got her SSI and had insurance that paid for the doctor's visits. His brother was a drug addict and spent all of her check and probably needed a fix. After a few weeks of arguing on the phone, Sam's brother called. He wanted to come over and make peace with him and have a drink. He made peace all right. He came over and shot him with a .410 shotgun. I felt sorry for poor old Sam. His own brother took his life. The whole thing was going to court, and he was going to be convicted of murder. A week later, things slowed down a little. We only had a few cases to do. One was of an elderly woman who died in her sleep. She was suffering from kidney failure and refused to go to the doctor. She also had many cats in the house that were left unattended for weeks. You can imagine the mess we had to clean. We do get a lot of hoarding cases as well. So I'm sitting in my office at the computer, ordering more supplies for our company, when suddenly my boss slaps a newspaper right down in front of my face. "Look at that," he cheered. I saw the headline in our town's newspaper, "Jimmy Stanton gets life in prison for the murder of his brother Samuel L. Stanton." A picture of Samuel was right below it. He was a skinny, unshaven man with scraggly hair. Holy shit, it all made sense now. The blood that came back in the J shape. The phone call I received with the hoarse voice whispering Jimmy. It wasn't a wrong number after all. It must have been Sam all along, reaching out from the other side trying to tell us who did it. I kept it to myself for all these years. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. Maybe Sam's restless spirit wanted justice and tried to reach out through me. Japanese ghost story, Nana-chan. I often used to spend my time alone during my childhood. My parents owned an ancient, run-down ancestral house in the outskirts of a village where there were no kids co-eval with me. I did have my brother, but he was very little at that time, so I didn't play much with him. I would often feel lonely because my younger brother got all the attention of my parents and grandparents. Anyway, to cure my loneliness, I would explore the house every day, which was pretty big with numerous rooms, and would find myself playing with various objects I found in the rooms. In the southwest area of our house, we had a storage room that was cluttered with various tools and objects. I spent a lot of time in the room playing with the objects as if they were toys. When did I find that mirror? I honestly don't remember much. I just know that it was already in a worn-out condition. No frame, no handle, just a circular reflective surface. Despite being an old mirror, it clearly reflected the surroundings without any fogginess. A few days later, I was playing with the mirror, checking my face, when I saw the reflection of a girl in the mirror. Startled, I turned back to see this uninvited guest, but what I found was nothing. I understood that she could only be seen in the mirror. Of course, I found it a little creepy, but I wasn't scared of her. She was a long-haired, fair-skinned girl. She was looking at me from behind my shoulders and was smiling at me. "Hello," I greeted her. Soon, we started talking with each other. I gave her the name Nana-chan. My parents found it weird that I spent all the time in storage rooms staring at an old hand mirror, but they didn't do anything about it as Nana-chan was not visible to anyone except me. One day, I said to her, "I don't have friends to play with. I feel lonely without any friends." Her reply was, "You can come to this side and we'll play whole day." But how do I do that? I don't know," she said with a troubled face. "I'll ask," she whispered after a while. I wanted to know to whom she would ask about it, but my instincts told me to stay quiet. After a few days, Nana-chan appeared again and said with a happy face, "I've asked the method to come to this side. Come here and we'll play together." I was happy, but told her that I needed to take permission from my parents. Nana-chan replied with a troubled face, "You can't tell about this thing to anyone. If you do, we might get in serious trouble and won't be able to meet again." I wanted to tell her it was a bad idea, but kept it to myself. "Tomorrow you'll play with me?" she asked me. I hesitated for a while, but gave her a slight nod. "It's a promise." She then proceeded her little finger towards me. I, too, reciprocated. Although our fingers touched only in the mirror, I did feel warmth in my finger. I couldn't sleep even a little that night. The whole night I kept staring in the dark, thinking about various things. How do we go inside the mirror world? What kind of world exists there? Why can't Nana-chan come to this side? Would I be able to ever return to my world? The longer I thought about these things, the more it increased my anxiety, and because of that, a fear of Nana Chan started growing inside me. The next day, I didn't go to meet her. The next day, too, and again the next day. I never went near the storage room after that. Months passed, and then years passed. I never contacted Nana Chan again. I then left the house to study in a high school. I graduated and started working in a nearby city, and after a few years I got married. By this time, the thought of Nana Chan had completely disappeared from my mind. A few years down the line, my wife got pregnant and moved to her parents' house to take some time off from daily chores. In her absence, I had to do all the housework, which I found troublesome. Also, it was getting quite lonely living alone, so I, too, went to my parents' house to spend some time with them. After having dinner at my parents' house, I retired for bed. At around midnight, I had this sudden urgent need to go to restroom. I woke up, went to toilet to do my business, and started washing my hands after that. While I was washing the hands, I unintentionally looked at the mirror in front of me. In the mirror, I could see the storage room, completely bathed in darkness, only lit a little bit by the light seeping from the restroom. I focused my gaze a little bit on the door of the storage room, it was ajar. A sudden realization hit me. I remember the door being closed on my way to the restroom. I immediately turned back. The door was closed. I turned back to the mirror. The image showed an ajar door. The door started opening slowly, accompanied by a creaking sound. At this moment, I could feel goosebumps all over my body, but I couldn't take my eyes off the mirror. A white mist emerged from the darkness of the storage room. The longer I started at it, the more familiar it looked. Suddenly, numerous images of Nana Chan, which were buried deep inside my memory, flashed in my mind. It was a nostalgic feeling for me, nostalgic but frightening. The next thing I knew was waking up on my futon, with rays of sunlight warming up my face. Maybe a bad dream, I murmured to myself. Anyway, I didn't want to spend another night at this place, so I decided to return to my apartment, even though I had the day off from work. I rode my car back to my apartment and proceeded to park it in the semi-basement, which is used by the residents as a parking place. While I was driving it into my parking space, I glanced at the rear view mirror. A familiar face of Nana Chan, smiling innocently at me, could be seen. I turned back towards the back seat, but like always, she existed only inside the mirror. She was there on my back seat, looking completely like what she was years ago. I was trembling with fear and wanted to get out of the car immediately, but I couldn't. Her gaze had frozen me in my place. "How are you? Why didn't you return that time? I've been waiting since then," she said. I wanted to reply, but couldn't. She added, "Why don't you come play with me right now?" "I can't," I blurted out. "Nana Chan, I'm sorry. I can't play with you anymore." She sat there quietly. "I've got responsibilities, family. A child is also going to be born soon." I was at loss of words after that. "Is that so? You can't play because you've become an adult? I understand you." She then said with a loneliness-filled voice, "It can't be helped," and smiled at me innocently. It seemed like Nana Chan forgave me. "In that case, I'll play with that kid." I didn't understand what she meant. After that, she vanished and never appeared in front of me again. 2 days later, my wife had a miscarriage. We haven't been able to have a child since. A ghost story. I remember the day I bought my first house like it was yesterday. I bought it early in October 2021. I was 21 years old and still living with my parents. College hadn't really ever been in the cards for me, so I worked in a steel mill for crap wages until I worked my way up to a reasonable level of pay. I worked hard and eventually saved up enough money for a down payment on a small one-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it had a full bathroom and a nice kitchen, and most importantly, it was all mine. When I first found the property, I thought that the online price was too good to be true, so I called the owner and set up a walkthrough. All I really needed to see was the price, and I was ready to buy. I got the paperwork finished and moved in. A couple of weeks after that is when this story begins. I had just finished off another mundane 12-hour shift, and I was eager to get home, grab a stiff drink, and pass out in front of the TV like I do every Friday night. It was just getting dark as I arrived home, and my street was already quieting down for the evening. I made my way inside and quickly changed into more comfortable clothing before making my way to the fridge to retrieve my first drink of the evening. Right as I was bending down to collect my reward for a hard day's work, I heard the obnoxious sound of my own doorbell ringing. I muttered angrily about whoever was keeping me from my peaceful afternoon as I made my way to the door. Then the doorbell rang again, and then again, several times in a burst. I was about ready to fling the door open and tell this idiot off for ringing my doorbell so much when I looked through the peephole and realized it was a small kid in a simple bedsheet ghost costume. My anger immediately fled me when I saw it was just a kid. This still struck me as odd, though, as it was Friday and Halloween wasn't until Sunday. "Hey kid, you know it's few days early for a little ghost like yourself to be trick or treating, right?" My question was met by nothing but silence and a stare. Feeling uncomfortable and eager to return to my afternoon of doing nothing, I decided I couldn't just leave the kid hanging, so I quickly found the small bag of Kit Kats I had in my pantry and jogged back to the front door. "Happy Halloween, kiddo. Hope you like Kit Kats." I held out the last 2 fun-sized treats to the young kid, but he remained totally silent. I could tell from the shape of the child's pale blue eyes under the sheet that he was a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old at the most. As the silence became lengthy and uncomfortable, I laughed and said, "What? You allergic to chocolate or something?" However, I was again met by silence. It was at this time that I noticed that the boy didn't have a bag for his candy. I told the feeble phantom to wait right there, and I quickly tucked back into my house and retrieved a plastic grocery bag from my supply in the kitchen and returned to the door. When I arrived, the child was waiting right where he had been. I quickly dropped the candy into the bag and held it out. "Here you go, little buddy. I noticed you didn't have a bag for your candy." The boy remained as silent and still as he had since his arrival on my stoop. At this point, I began to feel slightly annoyed. Clearly, this kid was messing with me. So I bent down and grabbed his small hand under the sheet and put the bag in his hand. Ready to move on, I bid the child happy Halloween and began closing the door. As I did, the boy turned and began to walk back out towards the road. Satisfied that the odd encounter was over, I walked back inside and flopped down in my recliner to turn on the game for the night. The next 3 hours were spent gulping down cold beer and half sleeping in my recliner, while grown men chased a ball around on TV until the groan from my own abdomen told me that it was dinner time. I whipped out my cell phone and slurred my way through an order for a large pepperoni pizza. The woman on the other end told me it would be there in about half an hour and hung up. I slumped back in my chair for several minutes, and right as I got comfortable, the doorbell rang. I looked at my phone and saw that it was 9:45 p.m. Who could that possibly be? I thought as I got up from my nest. I looked through the peephole and froze. It was that same little ghost from earlier. I pulled my eye away from the door and laughed as I opened it. "You already hit this house, buddy." Predictably, the bed sheet remained silent. I laughed again as the oddness of this little boy was suddenly funny to me. I told him that I didn't have any more candy and to have a good night before turning around and closing the door. I wasn't 2 steps from the door when the doorbell rang several times. I sighed as I opened the door to the same kid still standing where I had left him. "Look, kid, I'm not holding out on you. The candy I gave you earlier was all I had. Now, please, I'm trying to unwind. Have a good night." With that, I closed the door again and almost turned all the way around before the doorbell rang several times in a row. Now I was starting to get a little angry. I turned around and opened the door again. "All right, that's enough, kid. It's not even Halloween, and I'm really not in the mood. If you don't buzz off, I'm calling your parents." I hoped that my empty threat would be enough to scare the persistent boy off, but of course he said nothing to this and simply stared. I groaned angrily at the kid before slamming the door and proceeding back to my recliner. I had just enough time to sit down before there was a loud knock at my door. At this point, I was livid with this kid. Couldn't he see that this wasn't funny to me anymore? I stomped over to the door and slung it open while yelling, "Listen here, you stupid kid," before my voice caught in my throat. Standing on my porch was a confused teenage boy holding a pizza box. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That wasn't meant for you. There's been this stupid kid ringing my doorbell all night, and I thought it was him." The pizza boy laughed this off, and we exchanged money for pizza. "You would have had to have seen him. He just walked off, dressed as a little ghost." "Nope, must have missed him," the teen replied. That struck me as a little odd. It couldn't have been 30 seconds since the kid had last knocked on my door. The pizza boy would have had to have practically passed the kid in my front yard. It wasn't exactly like the kid was easy to miss either, as I didn't see a single other trick or treater on the street. I kept this to myself and tipped the pizza boy before I sent him on his way. About 45 minutes later, I was sitting in my recliner with my half-eaten pizza still open on the coffee table in front of me. I was watching the last bit of the game on TV as I began to have thoughts of slipping off to bed for the night. With this plan in mind, I rose from my chair and made my way to the bathroom to take a quick shower before bed. I walked into my bathroom and reached inside the tub to turn on the hot water, and right as I did, I heard a small squeak from behind me. I immediately turned the water back off and stepped back out of the bathroom to see what had made the strange sound. I looked around in the hallway before I made my way to the living room. Upon my arrival, I saw that the front door was standing wide open. I felt uneasy, as anyone would in this situation. Had someone opened that door and come into my house? I stood silently in the living room, listening to the sounds of my house, straining my ears to hear anything that sounded out of place. All my ears were met with was a ringing silence and the light hum of the refrigerator. I did a quick sweep of the house, checking in closets and under my bed just to make sure there were no intruders before I made my way to the door and pushed it closed. In the past, I had noticed that my front door would swing open after a time if it wasn't closed all the way. That's what it had to be, right? I had been pretty focused on that pizza the last time I had closed the door. I probably just didn't notice it wasn't closed. I laughed at my own paranoia before making my way down the hall back to the bathroom. To get to my bathroom, you have to walk past my bedroom door, and as I did this, I saw something white move out of the corner of my eye. I quickly swung my head back towards the bedroom, but I didn't see anything out of place. For the briefest of seconds, I thought that I'd seen a white shape next to my bedside table. I chalked this up to my paranoid mind playing tricks on me. I mean, the bedroom only has one door and one window that was still tightly locked, as it had been since I moved in. If there had been someone in my room, they would have to walk right through me to get out the door. I brushed this incident off and made my way back to the bathroom and turned on the water for my shower. I let the warm water soak over me and went through the process of cleaning myself up. After I finished, I turned off the water and threw back the curtain and hopped out. I made my way down the hallway to my bedroom. Just as I was getting into my drawers for some clothes, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There on my bedside table, stacked neatly one on top of the other, were 2 bite-sized Kit Kats. I knew for a fact that the 2 I had given the little ghost earlier had been my last ones. There was no explanation I could come up with for where they had come from. It had to have been the kid. At that moment, I was startled by a loud bang from the window next to my front door. When I turned, I saw that the same little ghost was standing in the middle of the street, still covered in his sheet. My shock and fear turned to rage as I realized that the boy must have opened my door earlier and hidden while I searched for him. He left the Kit Kats to give me a scare, and I was even more angered by the fact that it had worked. I sprinted to my front door and slung it open before stomping out towards the street. "Hey," I shouted in a rage, "were you just in my house? What the hell do you think you're doing, you stupid punk? You can't just go breaking into someone's house. Where are your..." At this point, I had reached the edge of the sidewalk and was just about to take my first step into the street to confront the boy when large black SUV plowed through the spot that I would have been walking. I fell to the ground out of surprise. Had I taken just one more step, I would have been turned into a stain on the sidewalk by that car. My mind then made its way to the boy that was standing in the path of that car. Oh God, I stood up and looked around to see if I could spot where the boy had ended up. I didn't see him, so I looked after the speeding SUV and noticed that it hadn't even slowed down. What kind of animal hits a child with their car and then doesn't even stop? I was still in my towel from the shower, but I was too shocked to care. I frantically looked around the area trying to see where the boy had been thrown, but to no avail. I ran back into my house, grabbed my phone, and called the cops. I told them my address and what had happened to the boy. They said they would have an ambulance and a patrol car to my house in a few minutes and to just hang on until then. After hanging up with the operator, I finally dressed myself before making my way outside to see if I could find the boy. This turned out to be much easier than I thought, as I nearly fell on him walking out the door. He was standing on my front porch just like he had been the first time that I encountered him today. At first, I felt relief wash over me as the boy was clearly unharmed. However, this quickly faded into a deep rage as I realized that the boy must have been hiding from me earlier. "What the hell is your issue?" I yelled at the tiny, sheeted boy. "That car would have killed me, and then you hide from me while I'm trying to help you. You know what? That's it. I'm calling your parents." As I shouted this last word, I reached down and grabbed the front of the boy's sheet and pulled hard to show him I meant business. However, what I saw underneath the sheet froze me in horror. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The sheet hung loose and limp in my hand, and where the boy had stood was nothing but my doormat. I just stood there with my mouth agape, my brain trying desperately to make sense of an impossible situation. At that moment, I felt something grab the sheet in my hand and pull hard, much harder than any child could pull. My brain was still frozen in terror and made me hold on to the sheet for a brief moment before I released it. When I did finally let go, the sheet shot off into the dark sky like a bullet, flying hundreds of feet in just seconds. My brain didn't have any time to try and make sense of this either, as a large invisible force struck me in the chest and sent me crashing back into my house. I scrambled around on the floor trying to figure out what was happening. As I finally made my way to my feet, my half-open door slammed closed. I turned and began to run for my bedroom in an attempt to escape, but found that my path was blocked by the boy, or whatever the hell this thing was, again draped in his sheet. "What the hell do you want from me?" I demanded of the sheet. Upon receiving only silence again, I turned towards the front door and tried again to flee from the specter. But my feet were snatched out from under me by the same force from earlier. I looked back at the boy with tears of fear beginning to well up in my eyes and yelled, "Why are you doing this to me?" And the boy finally broke his silence. A deep, inhuman groan began to rise from under the sheet. As it did this, the sheet began to rise up into the air. The groan began to turn into more of a demonic roar as the child's sheet began to grow in size, now big enough to cover even the largest of men. As it grew and roared, the house began to shake from the sound. As if things couldn't get any worse, small fires began to start on the floor around the beast that spread quickly. I finally forced my wobbly legs underneath myself again and managed to stand shakily. As I did this, the furniture in my living room began to shake before my recliner shot towards the front window of my house, bursting through it before crashing into my front yard. I attempted to make my way to the window to climb out, but as I did, my couch flew over my head and slammed against the window frame, blocking my path. I spun around now, facing the bed sheet, and noticed that it had grown as tall as the ceiling. I realized that if I stayed here, this thing was going to kill me. So I decided to do the smartest thing I could. I ran straight at the massive bed sheet. My plan worked exactly as I had hoped as I ran straight through bed sheet and the invisible form underneath towards my bedroom. The ghost screamed in a rage and flung my coffee table at me, but I was already in the bedroom, so the table only impacted with a door frame. I closed the door and locked it behind me, hoping it would buy me enough time to open the window and escape. I managed to open the window, but as soon as I put my hands on the frame to climb out, the window slammed back down with inhuman force right on top of my right hand. I screamed in pain as I yanked my now broken fingers out of the window. The door to my room suddenly burst off its hinges, and I noticed that my living room was now burning steadily as the large ghost bent into my room. I collapsed from pain and terror at the ghost's feet. I was trapped. At this point, the ghost had regained its former silence as it stood tall over me, laying on the floor in a heap. Thinking that death was certain, I reached under my bed and with my one good hand, retrieved my old baseball bat in a desperate effort to either survive or die fighting. The massive ghoul allowed me to get to my feet. "Come get some, motherfucker," I yelled as I drew the bat back to swing. But before I could land a blow, I was struck in the right side of the head by the invisible force again and knocked back to the ground. I felt hot blood running down the side of my face as I looked up at the ghost. I scooped the bat up and threw it at the head of the sheet as hard as I could. It passed straight through and clanged into the wall behind the ghost. The ghost roared in anger, and as it did, all the lights in the house went out suddenly. The invisible force seized me by the throat and slammed me into the wall, creating a deep impact crater. It held me there for a moment before the room was filled with an unnatural silence. Then the sheet began to shift slowly, and I realized that something was coming out from underneath it. A blackened arm began to slowly but surely emerge from underneath the sheet. As it emerged, it began to slowly reach for its own head, where it grabbed a large handful of the sheet and began to pull it off. Once it was off, I could finally see what had been tormenting me all night. The rest of the thing's skin was just as blackened as the arm. It was unnaturally tall and lanky, with arms that hung down well past its knees. It leaned its face close to mine and let out another low rumble. As it leaned in, I could feel heat radiating from it, and I could smell burning hair and flesh. I wanted to puke from the smell, but the tight grip around my throat made this impossible. I struggled against the force and kicked at the burnt monster, but I felt its grip tighten substantially and all air was cut off to my lungs. My vision began to darken as it squeezed, and I knew the end was near when suddenly blue and red light began to flash through my darkened home, and I could finally see the face of my attacker. Its face was human, or at least had once been human. Yellow and black teeth gleamed where a pair of lips should have been. It had only a triangular hole where its nose should have been, but the worst part was the eyes. The two pale blue eyes I had seen were now gone, replaced with a pair of shriveled, bloodshot lumps. The iris of each eye was covered in the shade of death and glared hatefully at me. Upon noticing the lights, the ghost spit out a sound that sounded like a scoff before violently slamming me into another wall, spinning me around and throwing me headfirst at my bedroom window. Then everything was dark. I snapped awake suddenly, still smelling smoke. "Easy there, partner. Take it easy. You're safe now," a voice said to me. My eyes began to focus, and I realized I was looking up at a paramedic. "What happened?" I managed to choke out. "We were sort of hoping you could tell us." The paramedic said as I managed to sit up on the gurney they had placed me on. It was at that moment I noticed the bright orange light on the side of my face. I turned my head to see what it was and saw that my house was engulfed in fire. When we arrived, the house was burning, and we found you all beat up, laying in the yard. We got a call from this address about a little boy getting hit by a car. We were surprised to find the house on fire. The paramedic was cut off by a police officer that had walked over. "Do you remember anything that happened?" he asked me. I told the cop about the boy, about the car, and about the thing that had attacked me in my home. He gave me skeptical and told the paramedics to take me to the hospital. At the hospital, I was told that I most likely imagined the entire incident. They had tested my blood and seen that there was alcohol in it, and that told them all they cared to know about my story. It was all chalked up as delusions suffered from a combination of alcohol and smoke inhalation. They attributed all my other injuries to my escape through the window. I really have to hand it to those guys. They even had me convinced. I mean, ghosts aren't real, right? I had been drinking quite a bit that night, but it had all seemed so real. I was discharged from the hospital a couple days later. I was waiting in the front lobby of the hospital waiting for my parents to arrive to take me home when a nurse walked up to me. "Excuse me, sir, but we forgot to give you back the items that were on your person when you arrived." The woman held out a small plastic tub that contained my cell phone and clothes. I thanked her and took the items, and she left me alone in the waiting room. After arriving at my parents', I went straight to my old bedroom, determined to have a nap. Before I did so, I took the clothes the nurse had given back to me and began digging through the pockets for my wallet and cell phone. But I felt something else in my pocket that made my blood run cold. After talking to my doctor, I had been convinced that the whole thing had just been an alcohol and smoke-fueled delusion. However, what I found in my pants pocket made me realize that the thing that had attacked me was real. Inside of my pocket, I found 2 bite-sized Kit Kats and a small piece of a white bed sheet with a short message scrawled on it. It reads simply, "Happy Halloween." The summer, my brother and I tried ghost hunting. You know those ghost hunting shows that used to be popular? The ones where a crew of people set up fancy equipment in an abandoned prison or asylum. Episodes normally featured the crew in the green night vision cowering from sounds or picking up voices on their devices. Well, my twin brother and I used to be obsessed with those shows. We would make sure to record every episode on our DVR and watch them while we hid our eyes between our fingers. We always used to debate whether the show was real. I was always the skeptic, but my brother Nate always believed in the supernatural aspects of the show. We would always follow up our ghostly obsession with YouTube. This was the earlier days of YouTube. Most of the content, if you could even call it that, wasn't by some person pushing you to look at their sponsors. YouTube at this time was mostly just people recording themselves on a camcorder, doing a quick edit on Windows Movie Maker, and uploading. We spent a lot of nights scouring the site to see if we could find evidence of supernatural phenomena. One evening, we found a video titled, "OMG, a real ghost caught in my basement, slow-mo footage." The video had less than 200 views and only 15 comments. We paused the video before it played so we could check the comments. YouTube at this time was notorious for people making random videos with jump scares. Most of the comments were just complaining about not seeing anything. But one comment stood out. The comment said, "You can see the ghost right at 4:37. Look at the top right of the screen." Nate and I both felt our confidence fading. "Okay, last one, and then let's switch to RuneScape videos," I remember telling him. The basement where the family desktop was set up immediately felt darker, and the empty space behind us felt occupied somehow, like there was someone sitting with us. Nate hit play on the video, and we watched as 2 kids our age recorded sections of their house. The video was mostly indiscernible, and there were multiple times that Nate and I looked at each other in boredom. The only thing keeping our attention was the little red bar moving ever so slowly toward 4:37. At about the 3-minute mark, the kids moved into their basement. The steps in the video led down to a room that was too dark for the camera to really make out. The kids slowly descended for a bit, their steps causing the old wooden stairs to creak loudly. Suddenly, the kids yelled, and it sounded like things fell in the basement, causing a loud clamor. The 2 kids hurried up the stairs, screaming that they both heard a voice calling out to them. The camera was having trouble focusing, but when it finally did, the older of the 2 kids looked completely petrified. The screen faded to black, and white text appeared that said, "Here's the slow-mo. Listen closely to the voice when I start to go down the stairs." Nate and I saw that the time was at 4:20, and I paused the video. "Dude, this is so fake. Let's just do something else," I told him. "No, man, we're almost done. Don't be lame." I was always so impressed with how Nate wasn't scared, even though he was the one that believed in all this stuff. He hit play, and the video came back in terrible half speed from Windows Movie Maker. The audio was elongated and hard to hear. As the video reached the point where the kids started going down the step, I watched as the little red bar reached 4:37, and just then, as the girl from The Exorcist took over the whole screen. Nate and I jumped, and I yelled loudly. The video then cut to black with text saying, "Haha, got you." Damn, that one got me so bad. I tried catching my breath. "Man, I hate those. Why do people do that?" Nate exclaimed frustratedly. "You know, I was really into that video before they did that jump scare stuff. I bet we could make a real ghost video." As we started watching other videos, I was so excited with the prospect of finding ghosts ourselves. I still wish to this day that we wouldn't have found one. It was the start of summer in our little Virginia town, and as we got released from school, Nate and I talked about all the fun things we were going to do. We spent most of the days playing football or basketball with our neighborhood friends. Our friend CJ lived right next door, and we were close to him. As August rolled around, the total freedom of summer had started to stagnate into boredom. CJ, Nate, and I had played all the video games we had, and we had watched a ton of movies. Our parents took us to Blockbuster every Friday, but even that had lost its charm. Just as we were running out of ideas, Nate exclaimed one lazy afternoon, "Let's start a ghost hunting YouTube channel." CJ and I must have looked unconvinced because he kept going, "Come on. Maybe it seems a little silly, but think about it. It would be something to do. And we even have an easy first spot because of the old Newman house." When he mentioned the Newman house, I felt a chill move through the back of my neck, even as I sat in the hot summer sun. "I don't know about that, guys. Doesn't that seem a little kiddish?" CJ said snarkily. "I don't care, dude. And you're the one who still has stuffed animals on his bed," Nate replied sarcastically. "I'm in," I said to break the tension. That must have been good enough for the guys because suddenly we were getting up and getting ready. One thing about my brother Nate was how quickly he could dive into a new hobby. When he decided he wanted to be something, that was that. He went to his room and started organizing and handing out roles. CJ was going to be the secondary guy, the one who got scared and walkie-talkied to the host. Nate was going to be the technical expert. He'd set up all the equipment and be the cameraman. He would also be the editor in post. I was going to be the host. I would explain the place we were investigating and do the voiceovers in post. Nate packed our backpacks with all the equipment, our walkie-talkies, flashlights, his camcorder, a tape recorder our parents had to serve as our version of an EP, some pens and notebooks to take notes. And just as we were getting ready to go, I remembered my old laptop. Our dad had given me an old work laptop. It hardly did anything at all. It didn't even connect to the internet. But it did have an old version of Microsoft Word. I could take any notes I wanted with it, and then use a thumb drive to move them over to the family desktop when we were done. I didn't even think the laptop would come in handy, but I wanted to contribute to the operation. When all of our bags were packed, we all headed over to the Newman house. The Newman house was a large yellow split-level house with a large red "for sale" sign posted in the driveway. The sign was old and worn. It hadn't been changed since it was placed originally. It was a street over from where we lived, and we drove past it every day on the school bus when the bus left our neighborhood. The house had been for sale for years at this point, and it didn't seem like that was ever changing. At one time, there was an old couple who lived there, but one day the husband came outside in blood-covered shirt and drank a beer while he waited for the police to come arrest him. A lot of the neighborhood watched the commotion, especially when they hauled her body out on the gurney. The story went that Mrs. Newman had developed dementia and was pretty much not coherent anymore, and Mr. Newman couldn't take it anymore, so he did what he thought was a mercy and went to jail for it. Even as 10-year-old kids, the story was too popular in our town for our parents to hide from us. In the 2 years since, there were a ton of local ghost stories told about the house. The most popular was that the house was haunted, and the ghost started talking to Mrs. Newman and eventually possessed her. Mr. Newman had to defend himself from her and knew no one would buy his story, so he sat down, enjoyed a final beer, and went to prison. All our parents yelled at us whenever they heard us talking about that fictional version of the story, because they said what really happened was such a tragedy. It was the middle of the afternoon when we went to the Newman house. The sun was low, but still hot. It was always so humid, and the air seemed to get even more muggy as the sun started to descend. We practiced a script for the opening of our show on our walk over to the house, and we had even given our show a name. We would be the Haunt Hunters. We thought the name was incredible and thought that YouTube fame was only days away at this point. The large yellow house loomed over the street, and its emptiness was loud. The windows all still had curtains, and you always felt like you caught someone slipping the curtain closed from watching you. The yard was well maintained, almost too well maintained. I remembered the day that they hauled Mrs. Newman out of this house, and I thought how strange it was that the house really hadn't changed at all since. Both of the houses on either side were lively, but the Newman house just seemed to live in a vacuum. Now kids in the neighborhood often played various games all over, and it was normal to see kids play in a yard that wasn't theirs. But we knew that this house had a reputation, and we didn't want to still around too long. I tried to ready myself as Nate set up his camcorder on the tripod and got ready for us to record. I didn't love the idea of being the host, but I knew CJ wouldn't do it. I didn't like having my back to the house. The feeling of being watched from inside and the presence that kept seeking back behind the curtains made me uncomfortable. I took a deep breath and turned to face my brother's camera and the street. He gave me the signal to begin, and I respoke what we had rehearsed. Hey guys, welcome to Haunt Hunters, where we dive into haunted locations and try and find real evidence of the paranormal. I recounted the story of the Newman house and made sure to talk about the local myth. As I finished up, Nate exclaimed, "Wow man, you nailed it. Great job remembering the script." One thing about 12-year-old boys is that they're not exactly the patient type. We did a lot of one takes that day. We spent time writing notes in our notebooks and putting the tape recorder near any of the windows. We did anything we could think of at all to catch anything paranormal. CJ would take the walkie-talkies around the house, and we would keep the camera on me and show me answering his calls about hearing things. We also brought a football in one of the bags and would occasionally toss it around in the street to make it look like we weren't just hanging out at an abandoned house all day. As the sun began to set, CJ got either bored or scared first and went home. The darkness only added to the creepiness, and Nate was determined at this point to get all the footage we would need to do the whole episode tonight. The house had a small window on the side of the house from the basement that we noticed didn't have any curtains. Nate was excited to look inside, where he was sure we would get some paranormal evidence. As we got down on the ground to look inside, we saw a large empty finished basement. The design of the basement was almost exactly like our house. We couldn't really get a good view of anything, so Nate suggested we bring out the flashlights we packed. "We'll look like we're trying to rob the place, dude." I said, mostly just trying to find an excuse to leave. "Okay, just make sure you cover the window with your backpack. It's just a quick look and we'll go home," he said as he set up the camera to view inside the house. He turned on the flashlight and we got a much better view of the room. It had plain carpet covering the entire floor, and the walls were covered in wallpaper with various birds on it. Nate slowly paned the flashlight's beam through each corner of the room and gasped loudly as he moved it farther. "There's a blood stain, oh my God," he exclaimed and handed me the light. "Look at the farthest part of the basement, where the little cubby is." I felt a lump in my throat like I was going to cry for some reason, but I didn't show it. I moved the light as he told me and saw what looked like a red stain on the carpet. I couldn't believe my eyes. Weren't they trying to sell this house? If that is what we think it is, why wouldn't they have cleaned that before trying to sell? Just as I started to move the beam, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. I saw Mrs. Newman. It was only for a moment, but as I moved the beam of light, I saw her move her head out from around the corner where the light could no longer see past. She looked just like she always had, but also wrong. She was frail like I last remembered her, but she was incredibly thin. I could see the outlines of her cheekbones and her hair was patchy. She was in an old off-white sleeping gown and she was smiling at me, but the smile was just too wide. Her eyes were the worst part. They were entirely white and looked sunken into her frail skull. She went back around the corner as my beam of light illuminated her. I felt all the hairs on the back of neck stand up. I screamed and dropped the light. "Nate, someone is in there. I want to go home," I said. My voice was shaking at this point. "Wait, what do you mean someone was in there?" he said in disbelief. "Nate, I just saw someone. I don't know who, but they jumped back behind the wall when they saw my light. Let's go." I was already packing my stuff. I couldn't believe I had just seen a ghost. At least I thought that's what I saw. Okay, can you just hold on for 1 second? You don't have to look anymore, but can you just take notes for me while I look? Please." The emphasis on his request surprised me. I think it really meant a lot to Nate to get to the bottom of his belief in the paranormal. "Okay, Nate, I will, but I'm not getting near that window again." I got my laptop out and opened the program to write notes. I took a couple large steps away from window and told him I would take notes of anything he saw. He started flashing the light again and traced the beam all over the room. He said he still saw the large stain on the floor, and I made sure to take a note of it. He stayed looking for a long while. He kept giving me notes of things, but all in all he sounded disappointed in his findings. We eventually packed up our things and went home. He uploaded all the footage onto the family desktop, and we combed through every second of it. He edited it all together and eventually uploaded it as Haunt Hunters Episode 1, The Newman House. The video ended up being out of focus shots of CJ and I talking about the local legend while standing in front of a normal-looking house. Nate eventually asked me to get the notes, and when I showed him that I had only written about 2 lines because I was so freaked out, he told me not to worry about it. We eventually played some video games and headed to our rooms for bed. When I got to my room, I took another look at the notes I had taken. Just as I did, I noticed that there was a second file in the Haunted Hunters folder. I thought that was strange because I created the folder as we were sitting by the window and I was setting up for Nate. The document was a Word document that was just titled with a period. I opened it, and to this day I get chills every time I think about it. All the document said was, "Come back, you haven't caught us yet." The Black Ghost. Sometimes there is no way or place to escape. After a long, hard day, bad life situation, stress, you wish to just drop on your comfortable bed, hugging your stuffed toy, relax and escape inside a beautiful, colorful dream, forgetting all real-world troubles and nightmares. However, sometimes dreams are not a better world as we think. Sometimes dreams can be much worse than our real world. This is the reason why some dreams are called nightmares after all. What if the dream world kills you instead of the real world? The day is done. You are now back home. At night, preparing to sleep, laying on your bed, pulling your soft sheets to cover yourself, daydreaming first of all the wonderful things you have always wished for. Your eyes are now shutting down, slowly. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The spirit starts leaving your body and roaming inside the dream. The first day, you are walking in unknown, dark streets. You may feel like you have seen somewhere before, or maybe you have been there, but you do not remember. Then now inside a vintage house to stay and sit there for a while. So far, the dream is normal, and it feels like you are inside a much better home than your real home. Can you feel this beautiful silence, flying here and there, dancing like nothing can harm you anymore? You wish to never wake up from this magnificent, simple dream anymore? Suddenly a black figure, a ghost appears in front of your eyes, out of nowhere. And it is not just a black ghost. You feel a very strange, horrifying aura coming out of it, like a demon presence, not just a random black ghost. Your eyes open, panicked. You push your body to sit, heart racing, trying to catch your breath, wondering what you have just seen. What is this black ghost? Why did it give you goosebumps? You are still tired and wish to go back to sleep, but you are too afraid of seeing this ghost again, yet trying to calm down. Take a deep breath, shut your eyes, and wish for a better dream. This time you are sleeping peacefully with a normal dream. The second day, preparing to sleep, wondering if you will sleep with a normal dream or have another strange nightmare. Your spirit roams, this time at a graveyard. You can see people wearing black clothes, crying and mourning someone's death. But you cannot see the name engraved on the stone. It is too blurry to see for some reason. After that, you went to a newspaper office, a man writing down the names of those who have just died for the obituary, your name on the list. This leads you to panic, wondering if you will truly die, or if, as some believe when you see your death in a dream, it means quite the opposite, living a longer and better life. You walk out trying to see a positive view out of all of this, but then this black ghost appears once again. On the third day, in this nightmare, you are inside a house with people sitting in the living room. They are talking about your death and how much they miss you. You were a young person with great ambitions and should have had a chance to live your life and achieve something. You walk around the house feeling sad, the world you will never see again as you lay dead in the darkness forever. Then the black ghost appears. The fourth day, trying to sleep, expecting the black ghost. This time, everything black and white, no colors, everyone you know dying, everything dying, the whole world coming to end. This black ghost appearing everywhere. Not only one black ghost this time, but many. They are floating everywhere, now circling you and trying to suffocate you. You wake up again, terrified and wondering what is happening. Every single time the same black ghost appears, and it keeps on getting worse and worse. It is almost as if your fear of real-life issues became less compared to this strange dream. You are too afraid to sleep again. You refuse to sleep from now on. Sometimes there is no way to escape. You are haunted forever. You are dying and wish to have a little rest, but too scared of getting lured back into this dark spot of nightmares. The fear of everything shaping itself in a strange way inside of your dreams. On the fifth day, after feeling exhausted and giving up, trying to sleep as your body collapses on the bed. This time, the black ghost is on top of you and tries to kill you. You are trying to wake up, but your body is completely paralyzed. You are between world and dream, yet cannot push your body to wake up. This time you cannot.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling content.